Yo guys, what is up? I hope you all doing great. In today's video, we're gonna talk to a very interesting YouTuber, Alina, who used to do acting, used to do modeling, and then she basically found out that making videos is her biggest passion, and now she's a full-time YouTuber traveling to all those unique destinations.
I am in one of the most unique places I think I've ever been, which is basically Kazakhstan's backwoods here.
She's mainly known for traveling Russia and Eastern European countries like Ukraine and Moldova.
It's more, do you speak Russian or don't you speak Russian?
So in this video, we're gonna talk about her past modeling career in Tokyo. We're gonna talk about taking trains in Russia.
I'm obviously not doing good. I reached my limit.
And what is it like when you're stuck in one cabin with 3 Russian soldiers.
3 guys, 1 girl. I know some people would be a bit uncomfortable with that, but they were like the nicest people.
We're gonna talk about her connection to Ukraine and her future travel plans. So keep watching to find out more.
Let me start by saying that I absolutely love your YouTube channel. I love that you have so many videos from all these like absolutely, unique destinations like Moldova, Kazakhstan, Ukraine. I mean, there's still very few videos on these countries on YouTube.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the reason that I choose to go to these sort of destinations is I feel like these places have so much to offer, but people just don't know about them or they think they're not friendly to just English-speaking tourists. So hopefully in time they'll get some more, screen time.
You have a very interesting life story. So you're Ukrainian/Russian raised in Canada, right?
Well, I was born in Kiev, Ukraine, and then at the age of 5, me and my family moved to Canada. And we moved to a really small town, like in the middle of nowhere, 800 people. And even though that was, an interesting time in my life, I always felt like I wanted, to do more in life and to see the world. So yeah, I basically started traveling by myself around age 15 and then really haven't stopped. So
Wow. I mean, that's super young.
Yeah.
So you sort of started traveling thanks to modeling, right? You were doing modeling.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you get into it?
In Saskatchewan, there's obviously not a lot of opportunities. So I went to a modeling convention in Vancouver, and then I got scouted by a Japanese agency who then invited me to come to Tokyo.
So how is it like for you being 15 and, going to such a huge city like Tokyo, I assume by yourself, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's because looking back at myself at 15, I, wanted to be by myself. I wanted to be an adult and I wanted that freedom. So I was so determined to do this kind of trip. And it was only when I landed in Tokyo, like by myself, there was nobody to meet me. You have to kind of like call your agent and they tell you where to go, where it really hit me that I was like across the world by myself. I didn't know the language and I had never even been to like Asia before. So I almost had like a breakdown as soon as I landed, realizing what I'd gotten myself into. But I'd say maybe about 2-3 weeks in, I kind of started to get my bearings. I had a really good agency and I kind of started understanding the city because Tokyo is such a large city. It has so much going on. It's so easy to get lost and it takes a while to kind of understand how everything works.
I mean, I can definitely relate to that because I went to China when I was like 20. I just turned 20. It was right after high school. And yeah, I pretty much also had a breakdown in the beginning when I landed in Shanghai and I was like, what have I done? I don't want to be here.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so you're 15 and you went for your first modeling contract to Japan. And then how did your life like continue from then on? Like, I know you've done so many interesting things. You are an actor, you do YouTube now, you do full-time traveling. So what happened after you basically finished school?
Right after that first trip, that experience basically made me never want to go to university because I now had this totally different worldview. I had met people, you know, who were their own bosses, doing what they love, traveling the world. And because I had never seen that kind of example growing up in my small town, I didn't know it was possible. But now, you know, I had this experience. And after I graduated high school, I had another modeling contract lined up for that fall. But that summer, me and my dad went to Peru. And then basically in between modeling contracts, I would do like other kinds of travel, but just for fun. I was kind of working, you know, part-time sort of gigs like waitressing, or I was a freelance writer. I had my own photography business. Like I had a whole bunch of random jobs to kind of pay the bills when my modeling or acting, you know, wasn't bringing in enough. But finally, I did decide to move to Toronto because of the film industry here. And I thought that that would kind of be my career since I was doing it so much in Tokyo. But yeah, Toronto wasn't quite as busy as I was hoping it would be. So that's what kind of brought me into YouTube, is YouTube became what I did when acting was slow. And then I just decided that I like YouTube more than I like acting. So that's kind of how that happened.
So it's interesting that you're saying that you sort of found out that YouTube was more of your passion, that you liked it even more than acting, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how did you sort of like came to that conclusion? Was it just like a natural, or did you expect that?
Definitely didn't expect it. Like even when my YouTube channel got bigger, I was still prioritizing like acting because I felt like, well, I've invested so much, you know, I've invested, you know, moving here. I have a great agent. I have these connections. I've, you know, paid for so much training. I was really hesitant to like let it go because I thought it was my dream. And what I didn't realize is that YouTube actually offered me so much more that acting didn't. Like with acting, you kind of got to be in one city. You got to really have a flexible schedule, be open for auditions. You can't take off a lot of time to just go do your own thing. And I realized how much I missed traveling. I missed just having my own schedule, being my own boss while still creating and performing. So in a way, YouTube is like, well, for me, like a little reality show of my travels. So I'm still performing, but it's just in a different way.
That's super interesting, you know, like how you can sort of find out what your new passion is, sort of,
Yeah.
I mean, I guess by accident, right?
Yeah, totally.
So recently, you went on a very long trip, right? How long have you been traveling in total?
Well, last year, my trip was about 6 months.
Wow.
And that is the longest that I've ever done for just like my own travels. And especially with YouTube, I had never done an extensive trip like that yet for my YouTube channel.
So you decided to go to all these unique destinations, as I said in the beginning, Moldova, Russia, Ukraine. How did you decide to go to those countries?
Well, I knew that I wanted to go to destinations that maybe people, you know, haven't heard of as much. I think that's always going to be the basis of my channel, kind of going to places that maybe aren't on the tourist map. But at the same time, I obviously have such an advantage going to these like post-Soviet kind of countries because a lot of people still do speak Russian, and I still speak Russian. So obviously traveling to any country where you know some of the local language gives you a much more in-depth sort of experience.
What were your favorite places in your trip?
Oh, I mean, there are so many. Starting, I guess, with Kazakhstan, that country in itself was so surprising. I don't know about you, but I do feel like before I went, I knew so little about it. Just maybe the Borat reference, you know, they say, you know, that's Kazakhstan, even though that wasn't even actually filmed in Kazakhstan. So that's, you know, what people's main impression here in the West, I think, is of Kazakhstan. And when I got there to Almaty and Astana, I was just like shocked of how advanced and how beautiful and how just modern those cities were. And then their countrysides are also just like beautiful. There's so much natural beauty in the country. So basically, the two main cities I would say are an absolute must for anybody who wants to go to Kazakhstan. But outside of that, I think in Russia, because I had never gone across all of it, I'd say some standouts would be Primorsky Krai, which is kind of near Vladivostok. It's kind of on the border with North Korea. And it has some like epic, beautiful nature and just this remote kind of wilderness where they have a lot of different kind of resorts. I think that area is incredible. And Lake Baikal, which maybe a lot of people would know, but I found that absolutely amazing. And probably lastly, Yekaterinburg. That was a city that I had never really heard of before, but when I got there, I was just like blown away by how much there was to do there.
How did you travel around? Did you take trains or planes?
I mean, it was my goal to take just the train to get like across it on the Trans-Siberian. I did like fly like to Vladivostok, obviously, but from Vladivostok all the way to St. Petersburg, I did take the train.
You took the Trans-Siberian train, that's how we call it, right?
Well, with the Trans-Siberian, there are maybe some trains that like will just go basically all across it. But since I was getting off, at quite a few different cities, you are taking like different kinds of trains. There's a whole bunch of different, classes, different kinds of trains. It just depends which cities you're going to.
So because you were there alone, right? You were traveling as a solo female traveler, and I actually myself, like, I always really wanted to do the Trans-Siberian train or just in general travel in Russia. But I've also heard some opinions of people saying that it's not necessarily very safe, especially if you're a woman traveling alone. What would you say about that?
Well, I wouldn't even say it's so much, you're a male or a female traveler. It's more, do you speak Russian or don't you speak Russian? That's what's going to make the biggest difference. So, of course, like, I had a huge advantage of being able to speak Russian. And as I kind of have said in the videos that I did on it, I'm not going to lie to people and say it's going to be easy if you don't speak Russian. It's probably going to be hard. So that's why I would say if you're going to do the whole Trans-Siberian by yourself, you speak very minimal Russian, male or female, I would say make sure you either do a lot of research of like the things you need to know or do before you do the journey. Bring like Google Translate, write down all the things you need. But as far as like safety goes, I honestly didn't have like any issues my whole trip. I was actually surprised by how I didn't have any kind of like scary things happen or like people, I don't know, try and scam me for something. Like that really never happened to me. Like people were actually just super, super helpful.
That's good to hear, because I feel like with taking trains in Russia, it's like that one of these things where a lot of people would have an opinion on it, but for example, I personally don't know one single person who actually did it. But people will have an opinion without really knowing what they're talking about. So on your trip, you also decided to come back to Ukraine, which is the country where you were born. How does it feel like for you? It's probably not the first time you went back, right?
Yeah, I mean, I still have a lot of my family there, so I try and go back every couple of years. So it is interesting though, because I do feel like every time I go, it is changing. Ukraine after the Soviet Union has wanted to really break away from Russia and kind of make, their own identity stronger. So it's interesting because even though I totally support Ukraine being an independent nation and kind of getting their political affairs in order, all that kind of stuff, but it's tricky as someone who was born right after kind of the Soviet Union broke up, where I still speak Russian. I don't speak Ukrainian. So it's very weird to go back to your own home country, still feeling like, you spoke the language that was the language of the country. And now it's getting, a bit harder to always be able to understand everyone, because most people like to speak in Ukrainian.
Oh, that's very interesting. That's actually I've never thought about it like that. And obviously, for those that don't know, Ukrainian and Russian are quite different, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really hard thing to describe because I think if I did live in Ukraine like full time, I think I would probably catch on to it like more because there are certain similarities. And even when I'm there for a longer period of time, by the end of like 2, 3 months, I always feel like, okay, I understand a little bit more. But for me, I can understand some of it if somebody's talking to me, but I can't speak it. Like I have no idea how to like form the sentences in Ukrainian. So they are quite different languages. You can't just like switch back and forth if you haven't been raised listening to Ukrainian or you didn't study it.
I'm Polish, so I
Mhm.
feel like whenever people often ask me if I like understand Russian, for example, but I don't. Like I maybe
Yeah.
there are some single words that I would sometimes understand, but that's literally single words. But with Ukrainian, it's much easier.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like I understand Ukrainian, but there are way more things that I understand than in Russian, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
So did you experience any like maybe like little unpleasant situations speaking Russian in Ukraine or?
Well, it's interesting because there there are definitely some people in Ukraine who, prefer that if you're in Ukraine, you should speak Ukrainian. But I will say that it's the minority because what actually is the reality of the situation is that every kind of area of Ukraine kind of has their own different balance of how much Ukrainian is spoken and how much Russian is spoken. So for Kiev, for example, like, the capital, it's almost been a half and half sort of city, maybe even more Russian about 30, 40 years ago. But if you go into the West, it's going to be like 90% Ukrainian. And if you go to the East, not that I've been there extensively, but I hear it's primarily Russian because they're closer to Russia. So you'll even have these funny situations in Kiev, for example, where you'll go into a shop and the person will like talk to the salesperson in Russian and the salesperson will talk back in Ukrainian, but they understand each other. And so it's like that's very common. So you'll never see people getting really angry about that type of thing overall.
That's always so interesting and kind of cool as well when people can communicate speaking two different languages.
Yeah, totally.
So after traveling Russia and Ukraine and all these countries, what would you say were the biggest misconceptions that you usually hear in the West that people might have of Russia or Ukraine or just Eastern European countries?
I mean, the first one probably would be this sort of, I don't know if it's because of sentiments of the Cold War or what it is, but Russians specifically have always been made out to be like the villains, the scary people, very cold, very standoffish sort of people. And while that can be slightly true, I don't think most Russians are like, super smiley, super, warm and welcoming to strangers, like if you don't know someone. But as soon as you start having conversations, with someone and, get to know them, and especially actually if you tell them that you're a foreigner, like they are very welcoming, hospitable people. They are like incredibly welcoming. So I think that stereotype of them just being very like cold and off-putting sort of people is definitely not true. And then another stereotype is that some people do think it's super poor and like there's nothing to see and do and it's not, English friendly. And whether the person traveling to these places wants to go just to the main cities or elsewhere, I think they would be very surprised at how much more advanced it is than they probably think.
I haven't myself traveled that much in Eastern Europe, well, considering the fact that I'm Polish, but I've been to St. Petersburg in Russia, which is such a beautiful city. And I think I can imagine that some people would be probably surprised.
Totally.
After your half a year long trip, do you feel like you would ever consider moving to Russia or to Ukraine to try out living there?
I mean, I don't think I'll probably have a home base for the next couple of years. Like, thankfully, that 6 month long trip basically grew my channel to a place where I can do this full time. So I'm already planning to travel in about 2 months time once more countries sort of open up. And I really don't think that I'll be having like a home base other than to come visit my parents here in Canada, a couple times a year or something. I think I am just going to be, the digital nomad sort of lifestyle until I do find a place that I feel really resonates with me, makes sense for my lifestyle. And maybe that'll be Ukraine or Russia. It would be easier for me knowing the language, but like, who knows? I might go to Portugal and absolutely love it, or some other country. So at this point I have no idea.
So for now you're planning to travel solo, right?
Yeah, I think overall I'd say I'm a solo traveler, but of course, like, I'll have friends, or I'll have some people that are so very kind to, like, show me their countries that I meet, for the first time there, make new friends. But yeah, I might go stay with like some friends in certain countries, but overall I just go by myself.
So what do you like the most about solo traveling?
Not having to answer to anybody, being able to do whatever you want whenever you want, and going as fast or as slow as you want, and just being able to really have time to like reflect on yourself, and your life. And I find that when we're really by ourselves a lot, we really have a much clearer picture of who we are and what we want out of life, instead of always having, somebody else in the mix. Not that I don't think it's great to travel with other people or like have a partner or anything, but I think everybody would benefit from some solo travel to do some soul searching and, just see the world in that kind of way.
Definitely. I mean, I 100% agree. So
Yeah.
What would be your best advice for someone who wants to travel solo, but is still like slightly scared and afraid to do it?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, you have to start small when it comes to this sort of thing. So it's like, if a person has never solo traveled before, especially if they haven't done a lot of international travel, like, don't make your first trip the Trans-Siberian Express by yourself, like, just don't do it. I think pick a place that's just outside of your comfort zone. So if, like, let's say they were Canadian and they've never left Canada, like, maybe do a solo trip within Canada, to a city that you've never been. Do it for a week, see how that feels. If you feel comfortable with it, go to another English-speaking country by yourself, also still quite easy. And then with every sort of trip, you kind of keep expanding on your comfort zone and, seeing places that are vastly different from where you live.
So I went for your Instagram and I saw this one interesting caption that you wrote. So let me quote you. You said that intuition is one of the most powerful and underdeveloped senses in our human experience. So did you have any like particular experiences or situations in life where you felt like, instead of listening to what other people were saying or what was the reasonable thing to do, you chose to listen to your intuition and it turned out right?
I mean, that's basically been my whole life overall. Like, I feel like the more that I've listened to my intuition, the more that I have this deep sort of knowingness that, like, that's what's right for me. Like, I can never speak for other people, they have their own directions in life, but I can speak that if I'm in a good place, if I'm listening to my heart, if I'm, following what excites me and what feels like the right thing to do, it just expands in magical ways that, I could have never even anticipated. It's almost like this foreshadowing of, like, where you're supposed to go, but you consciously, don't know that yet. But one recent example that I found especially funny was with this whole current situation, where back in December, I knew that I was coming back to Canada the end of January, and I knew I wanted to go visit my parents in the prairies, for a week or two each, which is what I usually do for March. But something told me, like, very strongly that you should, visit each parent for a month. And I was like, I mean, that really cuts into my travel time. I was planning on, just spend a couple months in Canada and then I'm off traveling again. But like, something distinctly told me of, like, spend a month in Calgary, spend a month in Saskatchewan, and I decided to do it. And then as I was in Calgary, that's when this whole like pandemic, you know, was announced, and things got very serious very fast. And so I was so grateful to be like quarantining, you know, with my parents instead of being here in Toronto, where I have like a little studio apartment by myself. And Toronto has had, you know, some of the most like strict lockdowns in all of Canada. So I would much rather be, you know, in the prairies with my parents for that very long length of time than by myself here. So I'm glad I listened to my intuition and, you know, booked to stay with them much longer than I usually would have.
But that, I mean, that's a crazy example.
Yeah.
Good one.
Yeah.
So it was sort of like, you know, going traveling without having really enough money saved, and relatively small YouTube channel also, like a sort of a intuition or listening, you know, to your intuition in a way.
That's exactly it. Yeah, no, it was so scary to me because I'm like, on the surface before I'm leaving, it doesn't look like I'm ready. Like I don't have enough money in the bank. I didn't, because I was working all the time trying to save up money. I didn't even have that much time to research. I was like going, you know, by the seat of my pants of just like, okay, I guess like I'll get there and like I'll figure it out, you know, and hope for the best. So yeah, I just had this very deep sort of understanding that this was the right trip for me to do at this time, and that like one way or another, it was, you know, it was going to be okay. So I definitely had to kind of battle with myself throughout the duration of those 6 months, because there was a lot of low points as well. But I kept trying to remind myself that, you know, I'm here for a reason. It's going to be okay. You know, just chill and enjoy yourself as much as possible.
So what were the low points?
Oh God. I mean, I think I had probably just my own anxiety was like the worst stress, because even though I'd say I'm overall a pretty positive, like optimistic sort of person, I also, you know, have a lot of challenges when it comes to like holding myself back and having like a lot of fear about, you know, how things are going to turn out, especially when you're by yourself. So yeah, I had like days where I just had to just stay in bed and just like get myself back to a normal sort of state before going out to film or taking the next step. So just myself was the biggest challenge. But outside of that, I'd say probably just the toll of traveling like so much almost every single day. Like with the Trans-Siberian, I try to take breaks, but sometimes you'd have like a 2-day long journey on a train, a 3-day long journey on a train. You know, you're literally just in like a cabin with a whole bunch of other people, not the best food experience, can't really go out and stretch your legs that much, you know, constantly moving.
So you took trains for like 2 days in a...
Oh yeah.
Oh man,
I had my first one, I don't know if you happened to see it, but it was probably the video that almost like started like getting my channel recognized. It was like my most vulnerable video, where like I had a breakdown on my first 3-day long journey. I had never been on a train for more than like an overnight journey, and was totally ill prepared for this. But yeah, it was like 68 hours or something.
68 hours.
Yeah, it's like 3 days. And yeah, I lost it.
How much did it cost?
Well, see, that's the other thing, because I, you know, really was trying to budget my money, you know, as close as possible. I did a very stupid thing where I went for the lowest price ticket, thinking that there would still be, you know, this sort of level of service, such as like having a restaurant on board or a few other kinds of things. And that wasn't the case. So because I had the cheapest ticket, I had the cheapest old Soviet train. There was no restaurant on board. I didn't have enough food for the whole journey. We barely stopped. And yeah, there was just a whole bunch of things that happened on that trip that like on the last day, I just like had enough and was so ready to get off that train.
I can't even imagine. Like the longest I've been on a train, I think it's maybe 24 hours to 23 hours in India.
And even that's long. That's long. 24 hours on a train is a long time.
That it was long, but I kind of got sick. So I was, which is horrible being sick, you know, on a train in India. Yeah. But I was also half passed out. So I was just, which was maybe not the worst thing because I was kind of just sleeping there. Were there any funny situation or like anything interesting in particular that happened to you on these trains?
Well, I definitely like met some characters. Like I met some really interesting people. Like my first trip, the first time that I got on from Vladivostok to Khabarovsk, I was in second class, so like 4 people in a room, and I was with 3 guys, probably just like a little bit older than me, that were in the military. And we got on the train kind of around supper time. And they had brought like this whole spread of food, like all this delicious Russian food, like cognac, vodka, just like everything. And at first, you know, I'm a little hesitant to, you know, take drinks from people I don't know, you know, in this little cabin, you know, 3 guys, 1 girl. I know some people would be a bit uncomfortable with that, but they were like the nicest people and like wanted me to join them with supper and stuff. And I told them, you know, all about Canada. They gave me suggestions for Russia. And it was just such a great way to like start my trip, I guess.
What would be your best advice for someone who wants to travel Russia by train?
Well, the research would be the top thing because if you don't speak Russian, like just having a good knowledge of how things work, watching a lot of content on YouTube of like other, you know, English speakers experience what they did, you know, that itself, just watching the sort of, you know, like how a station is set up, how you get on the train, what you need, like all of those types of things. Just do as much research as possible before you go. Make sure you're booking your tickets probably at least a month ahead of time if possible, because sometimes if you get into the summer months, certain trains and certain destinations can like really sell out for quite a few days. So if you have a very you know, specific schedule of you want to be here when, you want to book your train tickets as early as possible.
So what are your goals and what are your plans for future? I mean, I know you said a little bit about it, that your plan is to basically travel full time now, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I love what I do right now. And I think my channel is really going to expand in this next trip because I have a totally different way that I'm going to be going about my content. So outside of that, though, I think it would be really cool that if the right opportunity came up to maybe work with a larger sort of show or platform, like I think it would be really cool to do like a travel show, you know, like for Netflix or something like that. Like Anthony Bourdain is obviously the ultimate sort of inspiration. But I would like to just share these travels on a larger platform outside of YouTube. I think that would be really cool.
So do you already have anything like planned coming up, or is that just a dream for now?
It's a dream. It's funny because I've gotten like a few smaller offers to kind of do like travel hosting, but they weren't exactly the type of stuff that I had in mind. So I think if the right opportunity comes along that seems like the right fit, the right team, the right destinations, I would totally be up for it.
So you said that your content will change up a little.
Well, I think it's going to be like much more locally driven. With like my channel right now, it's been so nice to have so many subscribers like reaching out to me, like inviting me to, you know, their countries or suggesting certain places. So I think I'm really going to try and get as many locals on my channel to kind of give their insight and to show us around different sorts of destinations. Because of course I can give my own first impression of coming to a country as a tourist, but I think it would be super interesting to have a local guide in most places, or do more like street interviews, or do almost like documentary type of stuff.
That sounds really interesting. I'm excited to see the videos.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for doing it. It was super interesting to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And I hope all of us will be back to traveling and enjoying the world in a safe way as soon as possible.
I hope you guys liked the video. If you did like it, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and also don't forget to subscribe to Alina's channel. And please let me know who I should talk to. Do you know any interesting YouTubers or in general interesting people that I should interview next? And also, if you have a good name for this little interview show of mine, please let me know in the comments, because I still did not come up with a good name, but it's gonna happen at some point, I promise. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, and I hopefully see you soon.